Ethan Cole didn't realize the office was too quiet until he heard his own pulse. The conference room in Denver was all glass and chrome and framed certificates, an expensive attempt to hide the fact that the law firm smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee. He sat at the table, shoulders straight, hands flat, like he was back in uniform awaiting a briefing instead of listening to a stranger explain his grandfather's will. On the other side of the polished table, his cousin smiled like this was a game show. Troy Caldwell, 32, gym-polished, perfect hair, perfect watch, the kind of tan that came from rooftop bars, not hard work, tapped his pen against the arm of his chair. Tap, tap, tap. It was starting to sync with Ethan's pulse, and it made his jaw clench. The attorney, a narrow man named Harrow, cleared his throat. "Let's move on to the final dispositions," he said. "As you know, your grandfather, Dr. Henry Caldwell, left a substantial estate. The liquid assets, investment portfolios, and controlling interest in Caldwell Energy go to Mr. Troy Caldwell." Troy's smile widened by degrees. He shot Ethan a glance that was almost sympathetic. Almost. "And," Harrow continued, "to Mr. Ethan Cole." Ethan's back stiffened out of habit. Former Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan, medically retired after a roadside bomb, 35, and already feeling like an old man some mornings. He'd learned not to expect much from people like Henry Caldwell. "Your grandfather leaves the property known as Dustfall Station, located in Rio Seco County, New Mexico, along with all improvements, fixtures, and associated records upon said property." Troy blinked, then he snorted. "A concrete box in the middle of nowhere," he said. "Wow, generous." Harrow held up a hand. "In addition, Dustfall Station's operating trust fund, modest but sufficient for maintenance, transfers to Mr. Cole. There is also one living asset." He slid a folder across the table. A photograph was clipped to the inside. A large sable and black German shepherd, lean and intense, one amber eye and one icy blue. "Your grandfather's dog," Harrow said. "Registered name Ranger, but he responds to Ray, current age 5. He has been kept at a boarding facility near the station per Dr. Caldwell's instructions, pending this reading." Troy laughed outright now. "So I get a multi-billion-dollar energy company, and Ethan gets a dog and a bunker in the desert. That sounds about right." Ethan didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on the dog's photo. He'd seen that look before, in other dogs, working animals, search and rescue, combat tracking, hyper-focused, serious. "Dr. Caldwell included a personal note for you, Mr. Cole," Harrow added softly. He slid a single envelope across the table. The paper was thick, the handwriting sharp, but shaking. "Ethan, you were the only one who ever understood what it means to listen before you act. Dustfall Station is more than concrete and equipment. It is a responsibility I can no longer bear alone. If you accept it, you will know why. Do not sell, do not abandon, do not trust anyone who calls it worthless. The desert hears things before we do." Henry. The words should have made him angry, should have reminded him of the years of silence after Henry kicked his mother out of the family for marrying a mechanic instead of a shareholder. Instead, Ethan felt something else, a prickle, a sense of being pulled towards something he couldn't yet see. Troy shoved his chair back. "Enjoy your sandcastle, cousin," he said lightly. "If you find any buried treasure out there, do the decent thing and call the shareholders." He walked out with the easy swagger of a man who believed the world owed him everything. The door whispered shut behind him. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning. Harrow folded his hands. "Dr. Caldwell was unconventional," he said. "He set up a fuel and supply account in your name with a small outfit near Dustfall. A mechanic named Ben Yazzie will expect you. There is also a prepaid storage unit containing Dr. Caldwell's personal notebooks. They are to be released only to you." Ethan flipped the photo of the dog over. On the back, in Henry's hand, were 4 words. "He's better than I was." Ethan swallowed. "How remote are we talking?" he asked. Harrow's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "Remote enough," he said. "If you're looking for noise," he shook his head. "You won't find it there," which, Ethan realized as he stepped out into the thin sunlight, might be exactly why he was going. Rio Seco looked like a town someone had drawn in the margins of a map and then forgotten. One main street, a diner with peeling red letters, a gas station, a mechanic's lot full of sun-bleached pickups, dust devils dancing between them. Beyond that, the world stretched out into miles of ochre and bone-white mesas, splintered canyons, and distant mountain ridges faded blue by heat. The desert wasn't empty, Ethan thought, as he rolled to a stop beside the lot. It was just quiet in a way the city never could be. A tall man with long gray hair tied at the nape of his neck stepped out from under the open hood of an ancient Ford. His skin was the color of old leather, creased deep by sun and time. His eyes were sharp. "Cole?" he asked. "Ethan," Ethan corrected automatically, killing the engine. "You Ben Yazzie?" "Most days." Ben wiped his hands on a rag and nodded once. "You drive a long way to inherit a headache." "I've had worse," Ethan said. Ben studied him for a beat longer, taking in the scar along Ethan's jaw, the way he scanned the lot without meaning to, the habit of keeping his back towards something solid. "Your grandfather was stubborn," Ben said at last. "Smart as hell. Too smart, maybe. He said when he was done, someone who knows what it means to stand a post would come." He jerked his chin toward the rear of the lot. "Dog's in back. Been there 3 weeks. Hasn't let anybody close." Ethan's chest tightened. 3 weeks, alone, in a run of chain-link kennels. He followed Ben around the corner. Most of the runs held mutts. A couple ranch dogs, a nervous blue heeler, a fat beagle. They barked as the men approached, rattling metal. At the far end, the last kennel stayed silent. The dog inside stood perfectly still, facing the open desert, as if waiting for something only he could hear. He was bigger than the photos suggested. Thick coat, sable and black, fading to cream on the chest and legs. One eye molten amber, the other pale ice. Ears pricked, tail relaxed but ready. "Ray," Ben called. "Visitor?" The dog didn't move. Ethan stepped closer, posture loose, hands where the dog could see them. He lowered himself to a crouch, feeling the gravel bite into his knees. "Hey, buddy," he said quietly. "Name's Ethan. Supposedly, we belong to each other now." At the sound of his voice, the dog's ears flicked. Slowly, Ray turned his head. Those mismatched eyes locked onto Ethan's face and stayed there, assessing, measuring. He showed no teeth, no fear, just a kind of grave curiosity. "Can I?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the latch. "Your call," Ben said. "He's all teeth if he doesn't like you. Bit the mailman just for breathing too loud." Ethan slid the gate open, sideways instead of straight in, body angled, making himself smaller. Years of working around K9 teams slipped back into muscle memory. He didn't go to the dog. He waited. For several long heartbeats, the desert hummed around them, flies buzzing, a truck downshifting out on the highway, the creak of a windmill. Ray took 2 measured steps forward. He sniffed Ethan's hand, his chest, the sleeve of his worn flannel shirt, the faint traces of motor oil and gun cleaner, and the city. Then the dog did something Ethan didn't expect. He leaned just a fraction, pressing the weight of his shoulder against Ethan's arm. Not surrender, not exuberance. Acknowledgement. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Guess that's your yes," Ben said. Ray's bi-colored eyes flicked to the older man, then back to Ethan. "He was waiting," Ben added. "Soon as your grandfather left, the dog went to that fence and just stared east. Wouldn't move, like he knew somebody was on the way." Ethan rested his palm on the dog's neck, fingers sinking into dense fur. "Yeah," he murmured, "me too." The road to Dust Falls Station wasn't much of a road. Ben's old Chevy clawed its way up through a maze of arroyos and sandstone shelves, the tires spitting gravel. The sky seemed to get bigger with every mile, until there was nothing left but the smear of the Milky Way and the sun burning an invisible hole overhead. Ray rode in the back seat, calm as a statue, gaze flicking between the windows and Ethan. Every time the truck surged over a rise, the dog's feet braced automatically, muscles absorbing the motion. "You were in the Rangers," Ben said, eyes on the track ahead. Ethan stiffened. "Henry told you that?" "He told me he had a grandson who spent too much time with ghosts and explosions," Ben said. "And that if the boy ever showed up, I should make sure he got there in one piece." Ethan looked out at the desert, at the broken ridgelines, the jagged dry washes, the distant shimmer of heat over invisible distances. "He ever tell you why he came out here?" Ethan asked. Ben snorted softly. "Your grandfather told me a lot of things," he said, "most of them about rock density and signal attenuation, and how nobody in Washington could tell their ass from a seismograph. As for why, he said the Earth doesn't lie. People do." The truck crested a final ledge, and the landscape dropped away. Dustfall Station sat alone on a flat-topped mesa that jutted from the desert like a ship's hull stranded in ancient sand. A low concrete building squatted near the edge, flat roof, no windows on the south side. Behind it rose the skeletal frame of a radio tower, long, dead cables dangling like cobwebs. Beyond the mesa's rim, the ground fell into a labyrinth of canyons, deep, narrow cuts lined with shadow and pale stone, leading out toward the distant mountains. Ethan felt something settle in his chest. It wasn't peace. He wasn't sure he remembered what that felt like, but it was less noise. Ben parked near the battered metal door. "Station's been on skeleton power," he said. "Solar and a little battery, enough to keep the basics warm. Your grandfather made me promise not to go inside after he got sick. Said it didn't belong to anyone but you." He paused. He was afraid Troy would find a way to strip it for parts. Ethan thought of Troy's laugh in the conference room. "Yeah," he muttered. "That tracks." Ray jumped down as soon as the truck stopped, trotting to the mesa's edge. He stood there, tail still, ears forward, watching the canyon below like it was a parade route. "Place bothers him," Ben said. "He listens to it more than he listens to people." Ethan walked to the door. It was thick steel, scratched and sun-faded, with a keypad lock polished by years of fingers. He typed in the birth date on the back of the letter Henry had written him. The light turned green. "Of course," he said under his breath. The hinges groaned as the door swung inward. Cool air breathed out, smelling faintly of metal, dust, and something else. Ozone, maybe, or old electronics. Ethan stepped into the dim entryway, Ray ghosting at his heels. The main room was bigger than he expected. Concrete floor, concrete walls, a ring of workstations with blank monitors and covered keyboards, metal shelves lined with boxes, a scattering of personal effects in one corner, a narrow bed, a small bookshelf, a battered coffee mug left on a table with a ring of dried brown at the bottom. It felt like someone had just stepped out for a walk. The silence pressed on his eardrums. Ray broke it first. He moved in a slow, deliberate loop around the room, nose working, nails clicking softly on the floor. He sniffed Henry's bed, the shelves, the door to a side room. Every so often he glanced back at Ethan, as if checking that he was still there. Ethan walked to the central console and brushed a layer of dust off a laminated label. USGS, Project Echo, Dustfall, Array Control. He frowned. He'd heard rumors in Afghanistan, stories about classified sensor networks that could pick up explosions halfway around the world, that could feel the earth twitch before a quake snapped it open. He traced the letters with a thumb. "What were you doing out here, old man?" He found out that night. The first few days blurred into a rhythm. Wake with the light. Check the solar panels on the flat roof. Sweep sand off their faces. Make sure the batteries in the equipment bay hadn't overheated overnight. Walk the mesa with Ray, boots crunching over gravel, the dog ranging ahead and circling back, never straying too far from his side. The horizon was a thin, hard line all around them, empty and full at once. Inside, Ethan worked his way through the storage unit Ben had hauled up from town. Metal crates stacked with care, each labeled in his grandfather's blocky handwriting. Field logs, array calibration, Rio Seco Basin, study 1998-2005. He opened the first notebook on the narrow cot that had been Henry's bed. The pages were dense with diagrams and numbers, but even Ethan could parse the core of it. Dustfall Station wasn't just a monitoring outpost. It was the heart of something much bigger, a web of buried sensors stretching across the basin. Seismometers, strain gauges, deep-bore microphones, all feeding back to this concrete box on a mesa like nerves to a brain. The purpose, written in the margin of the first entry, was simple. Listen to the earth long enough, and it will tell you when it's about to break. His grandfather had spent decades building a model of the crust under this part of the Southwest. He'd cataloged every twitch and groan, every minor tremor, every settling aftershock. He believed that with enough data, you could predict which fault segments were loading toward failure, not with perfect accuracy, but enough to give people time, enough to evacuate a city. Ethan's chest tightened as he read Henry's notes on a small border town in Mexico, leveled by a quake in '89, on a sprawl of tract homes outside Los Angeles, where the damage would have been half as bad if people had had a 30-second warning, on the casual, cold calculus of acceptable losses in planning meetings, on the boardroom where Henry walked out, disgusted, when he realized Caldwell Energy and a tech conglomerate named Helios wanted to turn his research into a proprietary product, sell early warning like an app, prioritize alerts to clients who paid for the premium feed. He'd resigned, liquidated what little stock he had left, and disappeared into the desert. "Old fool," Ethan murmured, fingers pressed to the ink. "No wonder they called you crazy." Ray shifted beside him on the floor, letting out a low breath. His head rested on Ethan's boot, like an anchor. The notebooks explained the science. They didn't explain the feeling Ethan had, walking from workstation to workstation, seeing a life's work packed into blinking cursors and command prompts. A feeling that someone had put a loaded weapon into his hands and asked him not to pull the trigger, but to make sure nobody else did either. That night, as a crimson sunset painted the canyon walls, the first storm rolled in. Desert storms were different from the endless gray of northern rain. The sky went from bright to bruise in minutes. Clouds piled up like mountains, shot through with lightning. The air turned metallic. Ethan secured the hatch on the roof and double-checked the battery room. He was back in the main chamber, flipping through a manual, when he heard Ray's claws click rapidly on concrete. The dog was pacing, not aimless circles, not the restlessness of too little space. He followed a straight line, back and forth, between the underside of the main console and the far wall. Every few passes he stopped, sniffed hard at the seam where floor met wall and whined, a low, urgent sound that Ethan had not heard from him yet. "Hey," Ethan said. "What is it?" Ray ignored him. He went to the corner and scratched once, hard. The sound of his nails on concrete cut through the rumble of distant thunder. Ethan frowned. "There's nothing there, bud." Ray turned, locked eyes with him, and scratched again, harder, not random, the same spot. Ethan's skin crawled. He remembered bomb dogs in Kandahar who would freeze, then paw at a patch of seemingly empty dirt. You ignored that language once. You didn't ignore it twice. "Okay," he said softly. "You win." He moved the rolling chair away and knelt, running his fingers along the base of the wall. The concrete felt smooth, cold. At first. Near the corner, his fingertips traced something else. A tiny recess the size of a coin. He brushed away dust and squinted. It wasn't natural. A slim, perfectly circular plug sat flush with the wall, almost invisible. Around its edges, he could feel microscopic teeth. His pulse picked up. He went to the steel locker where Henry had kept tools and emergency supplies. The bottom shelf held a small black case Ethan hadn't opened yet. Inside, foam cradled a palm-sized device that looked halfway between a key and a pistol grip. Brass. Body, short handle, a stubby cylinder with a ridge of interlocking grooves. Ethan swallowed. "Of course," he muttered. He brought it back to the wall. The cylinder fit into the recessed plug like it had been made for it. When he twisted the handle, there was a deep internal clunk, like something unlocking far below. The floor shuddered. Ray took 2 quick steps back, then sat, eyes fixed on the wall, ears forward. A hairline split traced up the concrete seam, then sideways, sketching the outline of a door. With a grinding sigh, the entire section of wall pulled inward, revealing a narrow stairway cut straight down into rock. Cold air exhaled from the dark. It smelled of stone, old wiring, and something else. Antiseptic maybe, like a hospital corridor left sealed. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Stay," he told Ray automatically, hand dropping to the dog's neck. Ray stood. He didn't push forward. He simply planted himself at Ethan's side, like he had every time they approached the edge of the mesa. "You go, I go," his posture said. Together, they descended. The stairway ended at a heavy blast door with a mechanical wheel. The metal was smooth under his palms, untouched by rust. He turned the wheel and pushed. The door swung open on perfectly balanced hinges, almost silent. Beyond it, carved into the heart of the mesa, was Dustfall's true body. The chamber was circular, as tall as a two-story house, walls lined with gleaming server racks and racks of instruments. A catwalk ringed the upper level. Thick cables plunged into the floor and disappeared into the rock. In the center of the room, a bank of consoles faced a curved display that wrapped almost halfway around the wall. Every surface was clean, no dust, no cobwebs, no sign that years had passed since anyone stood here. "Jesus!" Ethan breathed. Ray padded forward, nails ticking softly on the metal floor. His eyes moved, tracking the shapes as if cataloging them. Ethan found the main control panel and a notebook resting on a lectern beside it. The first page was dated 6 months before Henry's death. "If you're reading this, Ethan," the old man had written, "then the desert has finally sent you back someone worth trusting. This is what Dustfall really is." The pages were half technical manual, half confession. Project Echo had started as a joint USGS-DoD experiment. Use high-sensitivity instruments to detect nuclear tests, underground tunnels, and microquakes. Officially, it had been mothballed years ago. Unofficially, Henry had kept Dustfall running off-grid, funded by the leftovers of his personal fortune and a handful of quiet grants from scientists who believed the work mattered more than politics. The more data he gathered, the more he was convinced. The Rio Seco Basin was overdue. Stress measurements along a buried fault line showed a locked segment building toward a catastrophic rupture, one that could shake cities from Albuquerque to Phoenix, collapse highways, dams, and aging infrastructure, kill thousands. Helios Dynamics, the tech giant that had courted him years before, had sniffed around Dustfall more than once. They wanted his predictive models. They did not want his warnings. They wanted to own panic. In the margins of one page, Henry had scrawled, "They are already quietly buying land along the least affected corridors. They will build quake-proof tech parks, sell safety at a premium, and watch the rest burn." Ethan felt bile rise in his throat. Another entry, written later, was shorter. "Troy came by last month. He didn't make it past the upstairs door, but he had the look of a man counting dollar signs, not lives. He is smarter than he looks, and more dangerous. If I don't get to the end of this work before my heart gives up, I need you to stand where I stand now, not as a soldier, as a listener, because Dustfall wasn't just an ear pressed to the crust." There was a final diagram at the back of the notebook, labeled Controlled Relief System. Henry had designed a series of small, precisely placed underground charges in an uninhabited wilderness to the south, along with deep well bores that could be flooded or drained to alter friction on specific fault planes. The idea was insane and brilliant all at once. Trigger a series of controlled micro-ruptures to bleed off enough stress that, when the big quake came, it would be smaller, less deadly. It could only be used once, and if misused, it could set off something worse. At the bottom of the page was one line, written shakily. "I do not trust anyone in a suit with this, but I trust you to know when doing nothing is worse than doing something." Ethan closed the notebook with trembling fingers. Ray leaned into his leg, solid and warm. The mesa seemed to thrum around them, like a living thing. Far above, thunder cracked. "Window?" The storm blew itself out overnight. By morning, the desert was washed clean, the mesas dusted with damp. The air smelled of sage and wet dust. Down in the core, Ethan brought Dustfall fully online for the first time in years. Banks of equipment hummed to life. The curved display filled with color and motion. A rolling map of the basin beneath their feet, painted in bands of intensity. Every tiny tremor registered as a flicker. Ray sat on the central platform, watching the shifting lights with the same gravely curious expression he'd worn the first time he saw Ethan. "Welcome to the inside of the world," Ethan said. The dog tilted his head. For a few days, Ethan lost himself in routine. He calibrated sensors, ran diagnostics, cross-checked Henry's models with live data. At night, he lay on the narrow bed upstairs, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant coyotes and the soft huff of Ray's breathing near the doorway. Sometimes the memories came back, the crack of RPGs, the smell of burning fuel, the taste of dust and blood. The sound of a buddy's voice cut off mid-word. When they did, he'd swing his legs over the side of the bed and find Ray already awake, mismatched eyes shining in the gloom. The dog would come sit close enough that Ethan could bury his fingers in that thick fur. The ghosts stayed loud, but they weren't the only sounds in his head anymore. He could hear the earth, too. A constant quiet shiver beneath the station. A low-frequency murmur like the ocean in a seashell, but drier, harsher. One night, as he sat watching the monitor, he saw a pattern shift. A cluster of small quakes along the southern margin of the basin, near the mottled locked segment, grew sharper, more frequent. The color band representing strain brightened a shade. Warning lights on a corner panel flickered amber for the first time. Threshold approaching. Ray whined, low and uneasy. His ears flattened. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "I see it too." He went back to Henry's notes. The old man had run simulations projecting possible rupture scenarios. He'd circled one in red. The worst case. If the entire locked segment broke at once, the basin would snap like glass. City centers would be hardest hit, where old concrete and unreinforced masonry still stood. The death toll would be measured not in hundreds, but in tens of thousands. Below that, written smaller, like Henry hadn't quite trusted himself, was the alternative. Activate relief in stages over 12 hours when stress parameter X exceeds threshold Y. Risk: structural damage to mesa. Station failure likely. Lives saved, unknown, but greater than zero. Greater than zero, Ethan whispered. That was always enough for you. He'd barely finished the line when Ray stiffened. The dog was on his feet, hackles lifting, gaze snapping to the ceiling. Ethan didn't hear anything at first. Then he did. A faint, distant rumble that wasn't thunder. A mechanical note under the sound of the wind. Engines. Plural. He killed the station's external transmitters out of instinct, hands flying over the console. Dustfall's heartbeat continued in the room. Outside, something else was coming. The first vehicle to crest the mesa rim was a glossy black SUV, dust ghosting around its tires. Behind it, a squat cargo truck ground its way up, suspension complaining. 3 men climbed out of the SUV, one in an expensive desert tan jacket and sunglasses, 2 in tactical pants and shirts that didn't quite hide the body armor beneath. Troy. Of course it was Troy. He pushed his shades up onto his head and spread his arms like a host arriving at his own party. "Ethan!" he called, striding toward the station door. "You've been hard to reach." Ray stepped forward until he stood half a pace in front of Ethan, body angled, eyes fixed on the intruders. A rumble built in his chest. The taller of the 2 armored men, beefy, buzz-cut, scar down one cheek, shifted his stance. His hand hovered near his hip. "Relax, Briggs," Troy said. "We're all family here." He flashed his teeth. Ethan kept his own hands at his sides, fingers loose, heart hammering with a different kind of adrenaline than the earthquake graphs had triggered. "You're trespassing," he said. "Gate was locked for a reason." "I own part of this company now, remember?" Troy said breezily. "Caldwell Energy. And Caldwell Energy funded this little science project for years. I'd say that gives me some rights to look around." "You inherited stocks," Ethan said. "You didn't inherit this station." Troy waved a hand. "Legalities, legalities," he said. "Look, I'll make this simple. Helios Dynamics reached out after the funeral. They were very interested to hear Henry had built something out here that actually works." His tone sharpened. "They've been trying to crack predictive modeling for a decade, and dear old granddad did it from a basement with chalkboards." Ethan's stomach tightened. "You told them about Dustfall," he said. "Of course I did." Troy's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Do you have any idea what this data is worth? We're talking exclusive licensing, global contracts, private early warning for governments who don't want to share with their neighbors. This is legacy money, Ethan, not your little disability checks." Behind him, the big man, Briggs, shifted again. The other, wiry, tattooed, scanned the horizon, clearly uncomfortable on the exposed mesa. Ray's rumble deepened, climbing toward a growl. "Easy," Ethan murmured without looking down. "Not yet." Aloud, he said, Helios wants control of Dustfall's data feed. They don't care about getting warnings to people who can't pay. They just want to sell certainty. And, Troy asked, so what? It hits riches first, the rest later. That's how everything works. Why should earthquakes be any different? Because Ethan had watched kids die in villages that weren't worth a news headline. Because he knew what it was like to be on the wrong side of someone else's acceptable losses. He stepped forward, letting his own disgust show. You need to leave, he said. Now, before I call USGS and tell them you're interfering with a federal research installation. Troy's smile finally cracked. That's adorable, he said, voice cooling. You think this is still about academic grants and little government stipends? He glanced at Briggs. Show him. The big man took a folded sheaf of papers from a pocket and tossed it onto the stoop. Ethan didn't bend to pick it up. It's a purchase agreement, Troy said. Conditional, of course. Helios acquires Dustfall's hardware and IP. Caldwell Energy retains a nice fat royalty. And the current custodian of the station gets a generous golden parachute. His eyes hardened. Or, he added, we assume the current custodian is uncooperative and Helios moves in anyway. They've got their own people on the way. Geothermal specialists, drilling crew, the works. My guys here are just ensuring a smooth transition. A flicker of movement on the horizon caught Ethan's eye. Below, in the labyrinth of canyons, several more vehicles, heavily loaded trucks, a low armored rig, snaked along a wash, heading toward a narrow side valley to the south. Toward the area Henry had identified for the relief operation. A gust of wind swept across the mesa, carrying the faint tang of ozone and something else. The air felt thick, charged. Ethan's skin crawled. The warning lights in his head weren't just from years of war. What are they drilling into? He asked. A reservoir, I think, Troy said. Henry's notes were a little cryptic, but Helios is confident there's something down there they can harness. Pressure, heat, whatever. They said his model suggested a whole new way to manipulate fault lines. His smile returned, sharp as wire. Control the Earth itself. Do you have any idea what sovereign clients will pay for that? Control the Earth, or crack it wide open. Turn around, Ethan said, voice flat. Call them off. You have no idea what you're playing with. The big man, Briggs, stepped in closer, massive shoulders blocking part of the sky. I think we're done talking, he rumbled. You're going to take us inside, show us the gear, and sit quietly while our techs copy whatever they need. Then you get your check. No, Ethan said. The refusal felt like a click inside his chest, a decision locking into place. Briggs reached for him. Ray moved first. He surged forward, a controlled explosion of muscle and fur, teeth flashing. His jaws closed on Briggs's forearm, just below the elbow, clamping down hard enough that the man's shout cracked into a curse. It wasn't a killing strike. He didn't go for the throat or face. He went for the hand reaching toward Ethan. The wiry man snapped a hand toward his waistband, but Ethan was already moving. Years of drilled motions took over. He grabbed Briggs's off-balance shoulder, used the man's own momentum to spin him, putting the wounded arm and the dog between them and the others. Enough, Ethan barked. Everyone stop. Ray held, growling, eyes blazing. Briggs froze, more from surprise than obedience. Troy took a half step back, complexion gone sallow. You're insane, he snapped. You sick a dog on my security? You bring armed men onto my station, Ethan shot back. You try to steal something you don't understand, in the middle of an active stress event. He jerked his chin toward the canyons. You hear that? The ground shivered. A low groan crept up through Ethan's boots, as if something deep beneath the mesa had shifted a fraction of an inch. Briggs's eyes widened. What the hell? Microquake, Ethan said. We've had a cluster brewing for days. Your friends are driving heavy rigs onto a loaded fault zone, like it's a Walmart parking lot. As if to emphasize his point, Ray suddenly let go of Briggs's arm and threw his head back. The sound he made wasn't a bark or a growl. It was a long, high, broken howl that made the hairs on Ethan's arms stand on end. He'd heard working dogs alert to explosives, to intruders, to drugs. He'd never heard that sound. Ray's body vibrated with it, muscles taut, nails scraping the concrete as if he wanted to dig through the mesa itself. The earth answered. A sharper jolt snapped through the ground. Far below, rock cracked with a sound like a distant gunshot. A second later, Ethan's satellite phone, linked to the station's system, vibrated at his hip. The tiny screen flashed a USGS alert, rapid uptick in micro-seismicity, stress indicators exceeding modeled baseline, elevated risk of significant seismic event in Rio Seco Basin within 24 to 48 hours. He showed the phone to Troy. "This is why you need to stop," he said. "Now." Troy stared at the screen, then at Ethan. For a heartbeat, something like genuine fear flickered across his features. Then greed buried it. "All the more reason to get the data downloaded fast," he said, voice brittle. "Once we have the live feed, we can sell early access before everyone else even knows what's coming." Ray snarled, teeth bared. The station hummed under their feet. The deadline, Ethan realized, had just moved up. All these stones. They ended up in the core because there was nowhere else safe to be. The first real quake hit an hour later. By then, clouds had piled over the basin again, brought in by a pressure system riding the same restless mantle shifts. Lightning stitched across the sky. The wind turned vicious. One of the drilling trucks misjudged a wash crossing and overturned, spilling equipment into a ravine. Ethan watched part of it happen on the station's remote cameras, grainy images flickering as dust and rain chewed at the feed. Another jolt rattled the mesa, strong enough to send a crack racing across the plaster upstairs. A shelf dumped Henry's books to the floor. "Down," Ethan said. "Now." Troy protested. Briggs didn't. He'd seen enough war zones to recognize when staying topside was a bad plan. He herded Troy and the wiry man, Mac, toward the hidden door, pressing a bloody rag against the punctures Ray had left in his arm. Ray led the way down, tail low, ears tracking every rumble. When the blast door sealed behind them, the station's hum seemed almost gentle. On the main screen, the basin's model pulsed in shades of orange and red. Stress indicators along Henry's locked segment had spiked. The microquakes were no longer scattered flecks. They were a band, a seam, a countdown. Troy stared at the projection, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "What happens if it breaks?" he asked. Ethan didn't soften it. "Major quake," he said. "Maybe an 8, long rupture, ground waves like a slow whip, freeways gone, old buildings down, gas lines snapped, hospitals overwhelmed, people trapped in places with no one to dig them out in time." Outside, another tremor shook the mesa. Troy flinched. "Can't you stop it?" he demanded. "Isn't that what this is for?" He jabbed a finger at the bank of controls. Ethan looked at the relief interface. The safety prompts glowed a steady amber, waiting for a key code that only 2 men in the world had ever known. One of them was dead. The other was standing here, heart pounding, caught between doing nothing and perhaps doing something unforgivable. Ray whined quietly, pacing a tight circle at his feet. Henry's notes echoed in Ethan's head. Doing nothing is sometimes the most violent choice of all. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Briggs," he said abruptly, "you ever been around artillery?" The big man blinked. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Why?" "You know how sometimes you use small charges to set off a controlled avalanche, or blow a trench wall to keep the big collapse from killing everyone in it?" Briggs's gaze flicked to the display. "You're telling me this whole basin is a trench wall," he said. "And the relief system is a controlled charge," Ethan said. "Sort of. We trigger a series of smaller ruptures under empty desert, bleed off stress, so when the main segment goes, it's a 6-point something instead of an 8-point something. People will still get hurt. But the difference between those two is," he exhaled, "it's the difference between disaster and catastrophe." "And if you screw up?" Mac asked, voice thin. "Then I might pull the trigger on the worst-case scenario myself," Ethan said. Silence pressed against the walls. The station hummed. Finally, Briggs said, "If we do nothing, that thing snaps anyway, right?" "Soon," Ethan said. "The model says months. The indicators say less." Troy shot him a look that was almost pleading. "Helios has people on the way," he said. "Real scientists. They can help." "They'll get here too late," Ethan said, "and they'll want to save the data more than the people." He walked to the console, fingers hovering over the keyboard. At his heel, Ray sat, So close Ethan could feel the dog's chest rise and fall against his boot. He thought of Henry dragging cables across this mesa in the heat, hands shaking with age but mind sharp. Of hastily scribbled equations, circled and crossed out. Of a man who'd spent his sunset years listening to a part of the world everyone else ignored. He thought of cities full of strangers who would never know his name. Of the way Ray had leaned against him in that kennel, choosing him without hesitation. "All right," he whispered. He keyed in the code Henry had hidden in plain sight in 3 different notebooks, embedded in dates, underlined letters, a private joke only another man who'd spent too long with classification systems would get. The prompts shifted to red. Relief sequence available. Estimated surface impact, moderate. Estimated reduction. In main event magnitude, 1.2, 1.5. The final confirmation block blinked. This action may result in localized infrastructure damage, landslide, and loss of station function. Proceed. Ray let out a low, steady sound. Not a whine, not a growl. Something like assent. Ethan pressed the key. What followed was, for a while, just numbers. Pumps whirred deep under the mesa, forcing water into certain boreholes, draining it from others. Automated charges buried miles away armed and waited for the exact moment when the stress curve crossed a line Henry had calculated years ago. On the screen, a progress bar crept forward. Outside, the world shook. The first charge went off somewhere in the South Desert, too deep for anyone on the surface to feel directly. But the station did. A sharp line of color flashed along the fault model, then faded, leaving the overall strain fractionally lower. "Come on," Ethan muttered. "Come on." The second and third charges followed in sequence, each relieving a slice of pressure. The tremors came more often now, rolling through the crust in waves. Somewhere above, something heavy crashed. Dust drifted from the seams around the blast door. Mac flinched with every jolt. His eyes darted to the exit like a trapped animal. Troy had gone pale. The slick boardroom sheen was gone, stripped away by the realization that the world did not care how expensive his jacket was. Briggs stood with his feet braced, jaw clenched, watching the readouts like they were a battle map. Ray stayed pressed against Ethan, gaze flicking between his face and the screen. Midway through the sequence, an alarm chimed in a different corner of the console. "Incoming transmission. USGS secure." Ethan stabbed the key to accept audio, only. A calm female voice filled the room, slightly compressed by the link. "Unidentified operator at station Delta Rio Seco 01, she said. "This is Dr. Aisha Narayan, USGS seismic network. We are seeing anomalous controlled pulses in your region, coinciding with elevated stress indicators." A pause. "Who are you, and what the hell are you doing?" Ethan swallowed. "This is Ethan Cole," he said, "custodian for Dustfall Station, previously operated by Dr. Henry Caldwell. I'm initiating a controlled relief sequence based on his models. If we do nothing, the locked segment under Rio Seco is going to let go in one piece." There was another pause. "Henry's dead," Dr. Narayan said quietly. "We thought Dustfall was offline." "It was on skeleton power," Ethan said. "He left the big red button for me." On the other end, he could hear keyboards clacking, voices conferring. "Our remote data confirms. Your segment is in the red," she said. "But we never approved a field relief test. You realize if you miscalculated—" "I know," Ethan said. "Trust me, I know. But your own sensors are seeing the upticks. Helios Dynamics has a drilling crew in the southern basin, destabilizing an already unstable area. We don't have time to convene a committee." Dr. Narayan cursed softly in a language Ethan didn't understand. "Helios isn't supposed to be anywhere near that fault," she said. "We shut down their application for a geophysical pilot project last year." "They went around you?" Ethan said. "Through my family." He glanced at Troy. For once, his cousin didn't meet his eyes. "Dr. Narayan," Ethan added, "I need you to do 2 things. 1, push out an emergency alert to every state and local agency in the projected impact zone. Whatever your models say is worst case, they need to assume it's happening." He took a breath. 2, if Dustfall goes dark, don't let Helios or anyone like them take over what's left. Silence. Then, "You're asking a lot for a stranger, Mr. Cole. I'm sitting on your best sensors." Ethan said, "and I've got a dog who knew something was wrong before I did." He rested his hand on Ray's head. "That's got to count for something." To his own surprise, his voice shook. Ray leaned harder against him. On the other end of the line, Dr. Narayan exhaled. "We've been watching that segment for 15 years, she said. Henry was the only one who believed he could nudge it instead of just watching it snap. We didn't have the stomach to test his theory while he was alive. Maybe that was cowardice." Another keyboard clatter. "Okay," she said. "We're with you. I'm pushing your live feed to our national center. Emergency alerts are going out now. But if we see your sequence making things worse, I'm going to yell at you loud enough to be heard through the crust." "Fair enough," Ethan said. The line stayed open. The sequence rolled on. Outside, the desert tore and settled in invisible places. Small controlled ruptures rippled along uninhabited ridges and through buried stone beneath empty scrubland. On the screen, the bright band of stress along the main fault line began to dim, slightly. The station shook harder now with each wave, as if it too were taking the blows for something bigger. A hairline crack traced across one of the support columns. Warning lights for structural integrity blinked. Mac whimpered. "Walls gonna hold?" he asked. "For as long as they can," Ethan said. "They're bolted into rock, but nothing's perfect." Ray suddenly bounded away from his side. He trotted to a far console, then to the stairwell, then back to Ethan. He barked once, sharp, then pawed urgently at a panel near the floor. "What?" Ethan snapped, nerves frayed. "What now?" Ray barked again. Another tremor hit, sharper than the last. A power conduit somewhere in the room sparked and died, throwing one corner into shadow. The station groaned, a sound that went beyond metal. Ethan cursed under his breath and flicked a backup power toggle. The consoles flickered, then stabilized. The relief progress bar crept into its final segment. "We're almost there," Dr. Narayan's voice crackled over the link. "Main stress indicators are dropping. You might actually—" She didn't finish because something else happened. A new spike appeared on the basin map, not along the main fault, but under the southern canyon where Helios's drill rigs had gone. A concentrated knot of energy, wrong frequency. "They're blasting," Ethan said, horror dawning. "They're firing their own charges to protect their equipment, right into the weakened segment." The spike destabilized a patch of rock the size of a city block. On the screen, models flickered between possible outcomes, math racing to catch up. Henry's carefully balanced relief pattern shuddered. "If they trigger a sympathetic rupture there, it's going to cascade," Dr. Narayan said. "You have to abort." "If I abort now, the main segment's still over threshold," Ethan said. "We'll just get the full snap, plus their mess." He felt suddenly, painfully aware of every human-built thing in the path of those waves. Of a nurse changing a bandage in a hospital in Las Cruces, of a kid stocking shelves in a grocery store in Flagstaff, of a bus driver crossing an old concrete overpass outside Phoenix, of people who had no idea some asshole in an expensive jacket was gambling with the ground under their feet. "Ethan," Troy blurted. He sounded nothing like a CEO now. "You can fix this, right? You can just adjust something." "I'm not God," Ethan said. "I'm a guy in a hole with his dead grandfather's notebooks and a smart dog, and you handed the detonator to a corporation that sees numbers, not faces." The room shook again. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. A fine crack ran along the curved display's frame. Ray barked sharply, then pawed at the panel near the floor again. There was a symbol etched into its metal Ethan hadn't noticed before, a stylized wave and an arrow pointing down. "Emergency egress," Briggs said hoarsely. "That your back door?" Ethan knelt and yanked the panel open. Behind it, a narrow tunnel sloped downward, lit by dim blue strips. "Maintenance shaft," he said. "Henry must have carved it when he put in the lower array." He shoved the panel wider. "Leads to an exit on the north side of the mesa. If the main chamber goes, this might not." He looked at Briggs and Mac. "You wanted a golden parachute?" he said. "This is it. Take Troy, get to that exit, and wait for the shaking to stop. Stay away from overhangs and canyon walls. If you make it out, you tell anyone who asks that Helios did this, not the crazy scientist in the desert." Troy stared at the tunnel like it was a snake. "What about you?" he demanded. "You're coming with us." Ethan met his gaze. "Someone has to ride this thing to the end," he said. "Shut it down clean so it doesn't turn into a runaway failure. That's me." Troy shook his head violently. No, no, I won't go without. Briggs grabbed his arm. Yeah, the big man said quietly. You will. He jerked his head at Mac. Without words, they hustled Troy toward the opening. The floor lurched again, almost knocking them off their feet. Ray took a step as if to follow. Ethan snapped his fingers. Ray, he said, with me. The dog hesitated only for a second. He trotted back to Ethan's side and sat, pressed into his leg as if welded there. Troy watched them, face crumpling around the edges. I didn't mean, he started. I know, Ethan said. That's the problem. Briggs shoved him gently into the tunnel. The panel swung halfway shut behind them. The chamber felt bigger without their bodies in it. Not emptier, just sharper. Dr. Narayan's voice came back, more urgent. Cole, she said, our models are updating. You're actually bleeding stress off the main segment, but the south anomaly is unpredictable. You still have a chance to kill your sequence before it... Oh, hell. The basin map lit with a new wave. A portion of the Helios drilling zone collapsed into itself, rock giving way. The quake that resulted wasn't as big as the worst case, but it hit like a hammer in a small area. Landslide, Dr. Narayan said. Uninhabited terrain. Their rigs are gone. She breathed out. They did that to themselves. The main stress band, however, dipped another notch. The relief sequence entered its final step. Stay with me, she said. We're almost there. Ray pressed closer, his body a vibrating line of tension at Ethan's knee. Ethan adjusted the final parameters the way Henry's notes suggested, shifting a small fraction of remaining stress toward a sub-segment under wilderness, away from the bigger cities. He thought of Henry up here alone, making these choices with nobody's voice in his ear, of all the ways this could have gone wrong before a quiver in the earth changed a single thing in anyone's life. Last one, he said. He hit execute. For a split second, there was silence. Then the world roared. The last relief detonation rippled through the basin like a slow thunderclap. Dustfall shuddered from floor to ceiling. The curved display spider-webbed with cracks and went dark, its glass giving way. A bank of instruments broke free and crashed to the floor. Part of the catwalk above tore loose with a shriek of bent metal. The blast door groaned, its hinges singing under strain. Ray didn't flinch. He stayed welded to Ethan's leg, eyes shining, throat rumbling with a sound that was half growl, half something. Else, a raw note that matched the frequency of the rock. On the link, Ethan could hear Dr. Narayan talking to someone off mic. Yes, I see it. No, the main rupture zone is lower than our initial projection. That's impossible. Doc, he said, voice hoarse, tell me it worked. There was a beat of silence. Then, almost incredulous, she said, the main segment slipped, but in steps. Your controlled ruptures pulled the teeth out of it. The combined event is a 6.7. Not great, but nowhere near the 8+ we were modeling. Strong shaking, broken windows, some infrastructure damage, but the waveforms we're seeing don't match total collapse. She sounded like she hardly dared to believe it. You just shaved an order of magnitude off hell, she said. Tears stung behind Ethan's eyes. He blinked them back, staring at the cracked screen, at the room that had become a ribcage protecting something vital one last time. You hearing that, old man? He asked the air. You weren't crazy after all. The station creaked. One of the support cracks widened with a snapping sound. Cole, Dr. Narayan said sharply, you need to get out of there. We're reading subsidence under your coordinates. That mesa may not be stable. Copy, he said. He looked down at Ray. Time to go, he said. He grabbed the most recent notebooks, stuffing them into a weatherproof bag. The rest, the racks, the consoles, the neat loops of cable, would have to fend for themselves. As he turned toward the emergency tunnel, a final tremor slammed through the chamber. Part of the ceiling gave way, concrete and rebar crashing down where they'd been standing seconds ago. Something heavy struck Ethan's shoulder, spinning him. Pain flared hot and bright. The bag skidded, landing near the tunnel opening. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. For a horrible second, he couldn't see Ray. Then he felt a weight slam into his hip, driving him toward the ground. Ray. The dog shoved him sideways, hard enough that Ethan's injured shoulder screamed. A falling hunk of debris smashed into the floor where his skull would have been. Go! Ethan coughed, scrambling to his feet. His left arm hung limp. He grabbed the bag with his right hand, teeth gritted, and half dragged, half stumbled toward the tunnel. Ray ran ahead a few steps, then back, then ahead again, clearing the path, barking sharply at obstacles as if giving orders. They dove into the maintenance shaft as another crack tore up the wall behind them. The blue strip lights flickered but held. The tunnel was narrow and low. Ethan had to half crouch, favoring his good shoulder, ribs aching. Dust sifted down around them, but the rock here felt more solid, less hollowed by machines. He could hear his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. He could hear Ray's paws slapping against the floor. He could hear, distantly, as if from another life, Dr. Narayan's voice. Shouting his name over a link he'd left behind, the tunnel sloped upward. After a stretch that felt much longer than it probably was, a square of paler gray appeared ahead. A hatch. Ray reached it first. He braced his paws against the rock, jumped, hit the handle with his weight. The hatch creaked, then gave an inch. "Good boy," Ethan rasped. Again. The dog hit it a second time. The hatch flew fully open, dumping a curtain of bright, dust-filtered light into the tunnel. Ethan squeezed through onto the north face of the mesa, sucking in lungfuls of hot, dry air. The world outside looked wrong. The southern horizon was blurred by dust plumes rising from distant slopes. A line of newly collapsed rock marked where a section of canyon wall had given way. In the far distance, tiny columns of smoke suggested ruptured gas lines, maybe electrical fires. But the cities beyond the horizon still stood. The power lines on the ridges still carried current. The highway cut visible miles away was cracked and buckled in places, but not dropped wholesale into a new chasm. Ray emerged beside him, shaking dust from his coat, eyes bright, tongue lolling. Ethan dropped to one knee and wrapped his good arm around the dog's neck, burying his face in that coarse fur. For a second, the quake, the war, the boardrooms, the ghosts, all of it blurred into one long roar in his head. Ray leaned into him, solid and here. "You did it," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. "You stubborn, brilliant mutt. You heard it coming before any of us." Ray huffed, warm breath against his ear. A hand fell on Ethan's shoulder. He recoiled on reflex, then relaxed when he saw Briggs's battered face. The big man looked like he'd rolled through a gravel pit. Dirt streaked his cheeks. His injured arm was hastily bandaged. Mac hovered behind him, pale but upright. Troy stood farther back, leaning against a boulder, eyes wide and unfocused. "The tunnel held," Briggs said. "Whole way. Scariest rabbit hole I've ever been in, but it held." He glanced at the mesa's crown behind them. "Saw part of your roof cave in from down there. Thought you might have—" "Not yet," Ethan said. Mac looked from Ethan to the distant dust plumes. "It worked?" he asked. "Like, really worked?" "It worked enough," Ethan said. "People will still get hurt. Some buildings are going to need rebuilding. But it won't be the apocalypse Henry was afraid of." He shifted his weight, shoulders screaming. Briggs caught the wince. "You need a medic," the big man said. "Or at least a sling and some ice." "Add it to the list," Ethan muttered. The whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter blades cut through the hot air. They all looked up. Two birds approached from the northeast, painted in USGS and FEMA markings. A third, darker, flew behind, military gray, no insignia visible from this angle. They circled once, then banked toward the mesa's only flat clearing. Ray watched them, ears swept back, not in fear, but in wary assessment. "You called them," Troy said, voice thin. "I didn't have to," Ethan said. "You make the earth jump like that. Everybody notices." The gray helicopter's rotors hadn't even stopped spinning when a woman in a windbreaker and headset jumped down, ducking under the blades. She was in her 50s, compact, radiating the kind of contained energy Ethan associated with officers on real deadlines. Dark hair threaded with silver was pulled back in a no-nonsense knot. Her badge read USGS, but the gaze that swept the mesa had something else in it, familiar caution. "Mr. Cole?" she called, raising her voice over the turbines. "Yeah," he said. She approached, boots crunching, taking in the cracked concrete, the hairline fractures in the mesa's surface, the bag of notebooks at his feet, the dog pressed against his side. Dr. Aisha Narayan pulled off her headset. "In person, then," she said. I didn't expect that when I woke up this morning. Ethan tried to smile and mostly failed. Sorry for the alarm, he said. Next time I rewrite part of the stress map of the Southwest, I'll send a calendar invite. She snorted. Don't do it again, she said. Once was plenty. Her gaze softened as it landed on Ray. This your assistant? She asked. Partner, Ethan said. Name's Ray. As if he knew he was being discussed, Ray sat up straighter, mismatched eyes steady on her. She extended a hand slowly. Ray sniffed it once, decided she was acceptable, and turned his attention back to scanning the horizon, as if expecting another threat. We've got early reports coming in, Dr. Narayan said, business returning to her tone. Shaking was strong in a lot of places. Some older buildings down in the older parts of towns, a few collapsed bridges. But we're not seeing the widespread structural failure we feared. Hospitals are still operational, power grids are limping but up, and, more importantly, she held up her tablet, its screen crowded with alert logs. People moved, she said. The folks in charge took the warning seriously. They shut down rail lines, they stopped surgeries, they pulled kids out of school buildings with unreinforced masonry and staged them in open fields. You bought us time. They used it. Ethan's throat tightened. How many? He started. Too early for totals, she said. But the difference on the models is staggering. She looked out at the dust plumes. There will be funerals, but there won't be a wall of names. Behind her, FEMA officials were already conferring with Briggs and Mack, taking statements. A pair of agents in windbreakers with a different three-letter acronym headed toward Troy, whose shoulders sagged as if some essential scaffolding had blown out from under him. What about Helios? Ethan asked. Dr. Narayan's jaw tightened. Our legal division is going to have a field day with the documentation you sent, she said. Unauthorized drilling in a sensitive zone, deliberate misrepresentation of project goals, attempting to acquire a federal research asset through the back door. Her mouth curled. Turns out, when you set off illegal charges on a loaded fault and then get buried by your own project, it's hard to argue we were just trying to help. Ethan glanced at Troy. His cousin met his eyes, shame and naked fear warring on his face. Are they going to arrest him? Ethan asked quietly. That's for justice to decide, Dr. Narayan said. But he's not walking away from this like it's an accounting error. She studied Ethan for a long moment. Henry used to call me, she said. Late at night, when the rest of the building was empty. He'd rant about board members and consultants and the way everybody wanted to wait until after the disaster to argue about whose fault it was. She smiled, small and tired. He always said, one day somebody will stand on that mesa who remembers what it's like to keep watch while everyone else sleeps. I thought he was romanticizing you, maybe projecting. Looks like he was just early. She tucked the tablet under her arm. Dustfall is badly damaged, she went on. We'll need to send in structural engineers before anybody goes back into the core. But the array itself, what's left of it, is one of a kind. We can't abandon it, and we can't turn it over to any of the corporations sniffing around for a piece. Ethan's stomach tightened. Who gets it then? He asked. She looked him dead in the eye. That depends, she said. Do you want to leave? The question hit him like a second tremor. Leave. Go back to a city that never shut up, where sirens and slamming doors sent him diving for cover. Go back to a life of waiting rooms and polite pity and the space between one nightmare and the next. He looked out across the basin, at the fracture lines, the dust plumes, the roads still standing, at the place where Henry's carefully mapped web of sensors had shifted fate's dial a little toward the side of staying alive. He felt Ray press against his leg, solid and present, watching his face as if the dog could hear the spool of his thoughts. Dr. Narayan seemed to read all of that in his silence. We could use someone who already speaks this place's language, she said. The math is one thing, the intuition is another. You have both, whether you think so or not. The government can rebuild the station, set up a proper team, pay you something that isn't an insult, but the person at the center, she tipped her head toward the cracked concrete. That needs to be someone who understands what it costs to close your eyes for a minute too long. Ethan knew, in that instant, that he could say no. He could walk away with a duffel bag and a dog and whatever money came from suing Helios into the ground. He could find some quiet corner and pretend he hadn't watched an entire region teeter on the edge of catastrophe. He looked down at Ray. The dog met his gaze. There was loyalty there. And something else. Expectation, not obligation. Just the steady, simple belief that wherever Ethan went next, they'd go together. He looked back at Dr. Narayan. "I don't like boardrooms," he said. "I don't like being a mascot." "I'm not offering you a boardroom," she said. "I'm offering you a station. We'll call it something other than a project this time. Maybe a promise." She extended her hand. "Stay," she said. "Help us listen better." The desert wind tugged at Ethan's sleeves. Far below, aftershocks shivered through rock, like the earth sighing as it resettled into a slightly safer shape. Ethan took her hand. "Okay," he said, "but the dog outranks me." Dr. Narayan laughed, a quick, startled sound. "Deal," she said. "We've been needing a new director. I hear he has good instincts." Ray thumped his tail once against Ethan's leg, as if satisfied. "Dabam? O Steban Jordipaspint." Months later, Dustfall Station looked different. The old cracked concrete building on the mesa had been replaced, not with a gleaming tower, but with a low, reinforced structure built to flex instead of shatter. Its walls were thicker. Its anchors ran deeper into the rock. Inside, the core had been rebuilt around the surviving parts of Henry's original array. New equipment hummed alongside old designs tweaked with modern parts. The curved screen now had redundant siblings. The maintenance tunnel had 2 more exits. On the western wall, above the main console, a small brass plaque bore an inscription. "Dustfall Station, in honor of Dr. Henry Caldwell, who listened when no one else would, and of those who keep watch after him." Ethan stood at the edge of the mesa, the afternoon sun warm on his face, the wind tugging playfully at his shirt. Down in the basin, reconstruction crews were still at work, but many of the emergency field tents had been folded. Kids rode bikes in streets where cracked asphalt had been patched. Farmers inspected irrigation lines, cursing and laughing in equal measure. The world had moved on, but not as far as it might have. Ray sat beside him, leaning just enough to touch. "You did all right," Ethan said softly, "for a guy who started this day in a kennel." Ray sniffed the wind, then nudged Ethan's hand until it dropped to scratch behind his ears. In the distance, a tremor no human could feel rippled through the crust. In the station below, a sensor registered it, translated it into a line on a graph, sent it to a server that stored it for someone to interpret later. Ethan listened, not with instruments, with that same strange sense that had drawn him here in the first place. The earth would never be completely quiet. People would always build where they perhaps shouldn't. Companies would always chase profit down dangerous roads. But on this mesa, at least, someone was listening with a different motive, not to own panic, to soften it. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't a company or a fortune or a name on a building. Sometimes it's a responsibility that feels too big for your shoulders and a partner who never asked for anything except to stand at your side while you figure it out. Ethan rested his palm on Ray's neck. "Come on, Director," he said. "Let's get back to work. The planet's not going to keep an eye on itself." Ray huffed, rose, and walked with him toward the station door. The desert stretched out in every direction, vast and old and full of hidden fault lines. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan didn't feel like he was waiting for something to blow up without warning. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, on a high, lonely mesa in New Mexico, surrounded by machines that listened for whispers in stone, and one dog whose instincts were wired straight to the trembling heart of the earth. A man who had spent most of his life at war finally found a different kind of watch. Not a battlefield, not a boardroom, a listening post. And he wasn't standing it alone.